The story. I just celebrated my 18th birthday a few days ago while residing with my mom, stepdad, and stepsister. Speaking of my stepsister, who is 15, let me share that she's arguably the most horrible 15-year-old I've ever encountered. She exudes arrogance, cruelty, and a constant need to compete with me. Our relationship has always been strained, primarily due to her unpleasant personality. Since my dad passed away when I was only 3, my memories of him are scarce. Instead, what fills my recollections are countless instances of conflicts with my mom during my upbringing. The situation took a turn for the more intricate when my mom married my stepdad upon my 16th birthday, and he officially joined our household. Curiously, they had been a couple since I was 1, but it took them 3 years of dating before exchanging vows. Even prior to their marriage, my stepsister had already displayed bratty behavior. Nevertheless, as soon as my stepdad took up residence, her behavior became even more challenging to endure. It appeared as if she had made it her mission to irritate me and engage in constant arguments. I voiced my concerns to my mom on numerous occasions and even discussed it with her dad, but they brushed it off as typical sibling rivalry. Their justification was that she would outgrow it, but I harbored the suspicion that the real reason for their reluctance to intervene was that my stepsister held a privileged position as the golden child of the family. Naturally, my stepdad consistently sided with her, given their biological relationship. To my surprise, even my mother made a conscious effort to show favoritism towards her. This deeply affected me, especially since I never received the same level of support. Growing up with my mom, I came to understand that we were inherently different individuals, and she didn't appreciate it. As a child, I leaned towards being a bit of a tomboy, with a keen interest in sports, games, and cars. On the flip side, my mother was set on molding me into a makeup artist since I was merely 7, advocating for hairstyles and dresses instead of my preferred shorts. While I didn't inherently oppose traditionally feminine interests, they simply didn't align with my personal preferences. Struggling to meet my mom's expectations, I felt hindered in authentically expressing myself. This sparked numerous conflicts between us. She persistently urged me to adopt more feminine pursuits and essentially mirror her in every way. The challenge was significant because I yearned to be an individual, and my mother appeared oblivious or indifferent to that desire. Conversely, my stepsister evolved into the daughter my mom had always envisioned. It was painful to witness the immediate bond my mother formed with my stepsister, as if she had finally discovered the ideal child she had always yearned for. As a teenager, this revelation shattered me. I was working hard to earn my mother's acceptance for my true self, only to have my stepsister appear and effortlessly assume the role of the daughter my mom had always envisioned. The fact that my mom now favored my stepsister was already difficult to bear, but her arrogant demeanor made it even worse. I found it increasingly intolerable, fueling my eagerness to depart for college. Thankfully, on my 18th birthday, there was a reason to rejoice. I had successfully graduated from high school, earned a sports scholarship for lacrosse, and was fully prepared to commence college in the upcoming fall. Anticipating the opportunity to leave the tension behind and embark on a new chapter in my life, I hoped for my mother to make my 18th birthday memorable. This celebration marked my final one at home with her, as my intention was to return only for holidays in the future. Nevertheless, my anticipations were misguided. Far from arranging anything noteworthy for me, my mother, in the vacant house later that afternoon, summoned me for a crucial conversation about the future. In the course of our discussion, she revealed a startling revelation. My stepsister was preparing for college in the coming years. Given that she didn't participate in sports like I did, my stepsister wouldn't qualify for a sports scholarship. Additionally, her academic grades didn't meet the requirements for an academic scholarship. Consequently, she would be responsible for covering her entire tuition. To my surprise, my mother revealed a bombshell during our discussion. They had chosen to initiate savings for my stepsister's college fund. Now that I was an adult, they also anticipated my contribution to the cause. Non-compliance would result in my unwelcome status in the house. The demand landed on me with the weight of a ton of bricks. prompting me to ask for clarification to ensure I had heard correctly. As per my mom, they aimed to steer clear of financial difficulties in the future and deemed it appropriate for me to start contributing. The ultimatum left me in a state of shock. Either contribute or face permanent eviction. The demand from my mother felt surreal, particularly given my financial inability to assist. The notion of being cut off for not supporting my stepsister, with whom I had a strained relationship, seemed utterly ludicrous. The gravity with which my mother delivered this ultimatum stirred discomfort in my stomach. Struggling to articulate my thoughts, I requested some time for contemplation and withdrew to my room. Both my mom and stepdad have professions in the medical field. She's a nurse and he's a pediatrician. While I don't have precise details about their income, it's reasonable to assume they earn enough to sustain my stepsister without requiring my involvement. The appeal for my financial contribution seemed nonsensical, especially considering the strained relationship I have with my stepsister. If we had a harmonious relationship, I might have entertained the idea, but the notion of contributing to the college fund of someone I disliked struck me as unreasonable. Compounding the issue, I was preparing to depart for college in a few months. Even if I were to secure employment there, it felt unjust to expect me to support my stepsister when I would probably need that money for my own personal expenses. I discovered myself in a challenging situation, torn between the looming possibility of expulsion and the yearning to spend holidays at home. The idea of staying on campus year-round didn't appeal to me, and the specter of potential homelessness after college weighed heavily on my mind. As I considered my choices, it became clear that navigating this predicament was close to impossible and, most importantly, unfair to me. Opting against entering into a futile disagreement with my mother, I chose to seek advice from my grandparents. Dealing with my mom seemed unproductive, as she persistently struggled to grasp my viewpoint, consistently leaning towards her own stance. Communicating with my dad's parents, who resided out of state and maintained sporadic contact, presented its own distinct set of challenges. My mom had restricted me from engaging in open conversations with them, considering them delicate and insisting that I only discuss safe subjects. Additionally, any visits had to be under her supervision, eliminating any possibility of unsupervised interaction. In spite of the limitations, I dared to surprise my grandparents with an unannounced visit during my junior year. Nevertheless, when I shared the impromptu visit with my mom, her reaction was quite hysterical. Concerned about avoiding unnecessary drama, I chose not to revisit my grandparents on my own. Despite the enjoyable time I had spent with them and the fact that they appeared less fragile than my mom claimed, adhering to the guidelines set by my mother became the standard in my interactions with my grandparents, and this practice has persisted until the present. On that decisive day, a revelation dawned on me. Defying the rules was unavoidable. If I aimed to secure the backing of the sole individuals capable of swaying my mother, my grandparents, in a realm where their influence over her choices was unparalleled, I recognized that reaching out to them was my sole opportunity to ward off the looming danger of being expelled. The idea of juggling a job, navigating college, and supporting my stepsister's education fund seemed unfeasible. Consequently, I decided to confront my mother, extract the terms she had established for me, and document her words for future reference. My bond with my grandparents was profound, and I acknowledged their mutual love for me. Yet, requesting their involvement in opposition to their own daughter required indisputable proof. Equipped with a reliable recorder, I initiated a conversation with my mother, persuading her to articulate her expectations for me once I commenced college. Despite her sounding exasperated, my scheme unfolded seamlessly, and she remained unaware of my hidden agenda. Armed with the recorded evidence, I notified her that I was going out with friends and would disclose my decision upon my return. Fortunately, she agreed, possibly softened by the fact that it was my birthday. While en route to my grandparents' house a few streets away, I wrestled with the gravity of my predicament. Upon arriving at their residence, I divulged the full extent of my circumstances. What started as a recounting of my mother's unreasonable demand and the looming threat of eviction quickly transformed into an emotional release. Without my awareness, the wounds from my mother's rejection had been festering beneath the facade of joy and relaxation that I projected during our visits. I had carefully constructed this veneer to protect my grandparents from the harsh reality of the mistreatment I endured at home. I never truly subscribed to that notion. My grandparents, in their early 60s, appeared completely healthy and well. I consistently felt that my mother's hesitancy to allow me to spend time with them originated from her apprehension that I might reveal the truth about her mistreatment of me. It seemed as though she dreaded the prospect of her parents discovering her actions, which could result in their anger and her having to face the repercussions. And sure enough, that's exactly what transpired when I eventually confided in my grandparents. After laying bare all the details, they stood up for me. They reassured me that they would resolve the situation. While I wasn't entirely certain about the specifics, my grandpa's determined demeanor indicated they were serious. As I regained my composure, they handed me a fresh $100 bill, encouraging me to go out and celebrate my 18th birthday with friends. The assurance to rectify the situation and ease my concerns provided a welcome sense of relief. Consequently, I opted to spend the evening with a few friends who had been consistently inviting me to join them that day. As we immersed ourselves in the celebration, I lost track of time and was reluctant to return home. It was my 18th birthday, and I was resolute in making it a memorable one. At approximately 9 p.m., a text from my grandparents disrupted the celebrations. They requested that I return to their place instead of going home. Intrigued, I complied, especially since my mother hadn't made any attempts to contact me. A peculiar silence given the significance of the conversation I had with my grandparents earlier. I reached my grandparents' house around 10 p.m. After refreshing myself, they sat me down and disclosed that they had talked to my mother. As per their account, they had confronted her about my disclosures, and the situation was now managed. Surprisingly, my family had been instructed to leave the residence they had been occupying, a property initially given to my parents as a wedding gift by my grandparents. Discovering the mistreatment from my mother spurred my grandparents to take firm action. Rather than merely acknowledging her mistakes and improving her treatment towards me, my grandparents revealed that they had a conversation with her. They approached her with kindness, requesting her to retract whatever she had conveyed to me and to enhance her treatment of me. Regrettably, rather than acknowledging her wrongdoing, she opted for disrespect. When my grandpa tried to intervene and comprehend the situation, she insisted that he mind his own business, convinced that as an adult, I needed to contribute financially to the family. She explicitly stated that if I didn't commence earning and giving back, I wouldn't have a place in her home any longer. My grandpa was infuriated by this claim, finding it unfair. This led to a heated argument in which he asserted his legal ownership of the house, underscoring that he had never officially transferred it to her. He made it clear that he had the authority to evict her from the property and presented her with a choice: either improve her mothering to me or leave the house. As expected, she opted for the latter. She proclaimed that her focus was now on her own family, excluding me as if I weren't a part of her family by blood. She coldly mentioned that she would clear out the house by the end of the week if that's what my grandpa desired, then abruptly ended the call. This clarified the reason for my lack of communication with my mother. My grandparents went on to explain that their decision wasn't solely influenced by my recent revelations, but also by my mother's behavior over the past couple of years. Since her marriage, she had grown apart from them, convinced that her husband and stepdaughter constituted her sole family. Her visits to her parents occurred only once or twice every 2 months, disregarding their pleas for more regular contact. While they had abandoned attempts to persuade her to visit more frequently, they had at least implored her to allow me to communicate with them or visit them. Nevertheless, she persistently concocted excuses, asserting that I was too occupied, all with the intention of preventing me from revealing the truth. Her manipulative strategies had effectively kept us separated for her selfish motives, but now, her deceit had boomeranged spectacularly. Due to her manipulation and deceit, she found herself compelled to leave the residence she had considered home for nearly 2 decades. The disclosure that my mother prioritized my stepsister over me was profoundly disheartening. What added to the pain was the apparent justification she concocted for her actions. Despite feeling disheartened, I had long abandoned any hope that my mother would ever cherish me as much as she did my stepsister. I started to perceive her true nature and no longer held any expectations from her. Choosing to spend the night at my grandparents' place, I purposefully steered clear of any contact with my mother. In that moment, I loathed being her daughter and harbored intense anger toward her actions. The next morning, I went back home with my grandpa to gather some clothes and essential belongings. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone displaying anger and disappointment, including my stepsister who was present at home. Despite the evident tension, I opted not to interact with them and headed straight to my room to pack. My grandpa accompanied me, assisting with the task. Around 10 minutes into the process, my mother entered the room, insisting on speaking with me face to face. Despite my initial reluctance, I eventually yielded to her relentless requests and consented to a private conversation. During our discussion, she revealed that she had been feigning confidence during her phone call with her dad, acknowledging her inability to afford a sudden move. Presently, she required me to approach my grandpa to address the situation. I was shocked by her boldness in making yet another request, considering her recent behavior. Without a moment's hesitation, I staunchly declined, bluntly expressing that she had forfeited the privilege to communicate with me after her previous actions. Having already reached a resolution, she now felt obligated to uphold it. In her explanation, she clarified that her aim wasn't to inflict harm on me. Instead, she asserted that she was trying to cultivate a sense of responsibility within me. The focal point of the incident was her request for financial support towards my stepsister's college fund. In the course of our discussion, tears filled her eyes, and she stressed that if only I had considered her deserving of a conversation instead of hastily airing grievances to my grandparents, I would have grasped her genuine intentions. In her account, the funds allocated for my stepsister's education were meant for a distinct account, which she intended to bestow upon me at a later time. The essence of her argument was that a sincere conversation would have revealed that she never had any intention of displacing me from her home, particularly over a matter as inconsequential as this financial issue. Remarkably, she asserted that, in contrast, I was jeopardizing her eviction from her own dwelling, a disclosure that clearly inflicted deep emotional pain on her. Although she afforded me the autonomy to make my own decisions, she pleaded with me to remember that her actions originated from love and a sincere concern for my well-being. Taken aback and rendered speechless, I've spent the last 2 days wrestling with this unexpected revelation. I haven't disclosed the encounter to anyone, finding myself unable to confide in friends or family. The ambiguity surrounding the sincerity of my mother's words intensifies the guilt gnawing at me. Amidst this state of bewilderment, I turn to seek clarity here. Is it fair to label me as the antagonist for bringing my concerns to my grandparents, especially when my mother had threatened to evict me for declining to contribute to my stepsister's college fund? Update 1. I wish to convey my appreciation for your guidance and uplifting words. Recently, I took the initiative to talk to my grandparents about the information my mother had shared with me. To my surprise, my grandfather seemed rather skeptical, questioning the likelihood of my mother truly intending to set aside that money for me. He suggested that it appeared to be a bluff, just another effort to manipulate me into allowing them to stay. I found myself concurring with my grandpa. Despite the emotional toll it exacted on me, I couldn't dispel the notion that my mother hadn't genuinely undergone a change of heart. To verify the authenticity of her statements, I opted to test her. In a somewhat emotional state, I phoned her and conveyed that I had reevaluated the situation. I expressed my desire for my grandpa to transfer the house's ownership to me, purely as a precaution. At first, my mother appeared surprised and endeavored to reassure me, asserting that there was nothing to be concerned about. Nevertheless, as I persevered, she became confrontational, accusing me of lacking trust in her. I held firm, articulating that trust couldn't be built overnight, especially after years of mistreatment. In retaliation, she erupted, instructing me to go to hell and proclaiming that she never wanted a daughter like me in the first place. This confrontation validated my long-standing suspicion. that my mother's abrupt kindness was simply a tactic to sidestep eviction and secure legal ownership of the house through my grandparents and me. Regrettably, that avenue is no longer available. I've accepted the reality that I won't be manipulated any further. If my mother doesn't desire a daughter like me, so be it. The sentiment is reciprocated. I won't maintain a relationship with a mother like her any longer. Update 2. I'm delighted to announce that the legal procedures have been finalized, and I am now the official owner of the house. My mother has begun the moving out process. While initially she had just a week, my grandparents and I have chosen to extend that time frame to 2 weeks as a gesture of kindness. At present, she has approximately 4 days remaining to leave the premises. Furthermore, my grandparents are in the process of arranging the sale of their current residence. The plan is for them to relocate with me and assume the duty of looking after the house while I'm away at college. I consider this idea to be truly fantastic and eagerly anticipate stepping into this new chapter of my life. The prospect of commencing my college journey with my grandparents by my side to provide support and take care of the house is genuinely thrilling. Update 3. I'm pleased to announce that this is probably my final update for the time being. Everything has fallen into place quite unexpectedly. Today, my mother moved out and handed over the keys before saying her goodbyes. Nevertheless, her exit didn't occur without a spiteful parting remark. In a rather unpleasant tone, she reminded me that I would come to regret my decisions in the future. I'm puzzled as to why she's holding on to such bitterness, particularly given her good fortune in securing an apartment near the school and her workplace on such short notice. Although it's a more compact space, perhaps a lesson in gratitude is warranted. Personally, I am thankful for my amazing grandparents, whose support has remained steadfast, and for my friends who have been remarkably supportive since I opened up to them about my challenges. Furthermore, I want to express my appreciation to each of you here. Despite being strangers, the kindness I've encountered has been truly meaningful. As I compose this message on my trusty old laptop in the familiar surroundings of my room in my previous home, the atmosphere has changed, imbued with the genuine love of a family that truly cares for me. In a matter of months, I'll be taking another major stride as I move away to pursue my education at a college of my choosing. At last, I am living the life I had always imagined, and the joy it brings is immeasurable. Stay tuned for more stories on our channel.